My name is Lexie Maitland. I live in Tampa, Florida. I was born and raised in the Midwest. So I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. I moved down to Tampa it was in the fall of 2017, which is crazy to think because it feels like it was yesterday. But I moved down here initially for school. So I'm a graduate from the University of Tampa. I got my degree in exercise physiology there. And I am also a online coach. I coach for Team Pro Physique. It is owned and founded by Paul Ravella, who lives here in Tampa, Florida. So that's my full-time job. And I actually started that it was towards the end of my junior year in college, believe it or not, is when I got hired on a Pro Physique. And it was so exciting to me because it definitely aligned with like what I was going to school for. And I was super, super happy to get that opportunity. So I started with a lot of lifestyle clients primarily. I feel like that's how a lot of coaches start out, with lifestyle clients. And then being a competitor myself, I've slowly started to take on more and more competitors. So now I have a pretty even mix between competitor clients, a lot of first-time competitors, and then lifestyle clients. And then I am a competitor myself, so an NPC Bikini competitor. And I've competed 5 times. Actually, believe it or not, the first show I ever did was during my freshman year of college at UT. So I actually prepped out of my dorm room. And so I look back honestly, and I'm like, I have no idea how I did it. I really don't, because I lived in it wasn't a nice apartment dorm room. It was a triple, like a shoebox with 3 beds essentially. And so I had my microwave, I had my fridge, but that was it. We had a community kitchen on the first floor. By the grace of God, I made it work somehow. And that's where I say, when there is a will, there is a way. But that was kind of my initial jump into the sport and the industry of bodybuilding. I moved down to Florida, and I was going to the gym all the time, and I kept getting asked are you a competitor? Are you a competitor? And I was like, no. I had no idea, really didn't know much about the sport of bodybuilding. And so I was getting asked a decent amount of times if I was a competitor. So finally I'm like, you know what, I'm going to try it out. So I hired a local coach. It was a girl who went to my gym. She was a bikini pro. And so I hired her, and I did my first 2 shows with her my freshman year of college. And then I've been hooked ever since. And then, coaching and just competing as an athlete, those are, my 2 passions. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell.
How did you actually get interested, or where did that interest come from, wanting to learn more about exercise, learn more about fitness? Was it something from, early on in your childhood, or was it something that was from sports? Where did that come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So growing up, my background is actually I was a competitive gymnast growing up. I think I started gymnastics when I was 7. So I did that competitively from when I was 7 to when I was in high school. So that was my identity for a long time. And I was in the gym all the time. I didn't really have much of a life outside of school and in the gymnastics gym. And then it was a really, really tough decision for me to eventually, I guess, give that up in high school, because I did want to pursue having a little bit of that high school experience and getting to be more involved in high school. So once I quit gymnastics, it was funny. My biggest fear was I was always known for being that girl who was in shape because I was a gymnast. I had a decent amount of muscle for my age, and I was super disciplined. So I was so afraid of losing that identity. So I joined the cheer team at my school. But I also so I went through a little bit of a phase where I did running. My mom was a long distance runner. So at the same time, as I was on the cheer team in high school, I also did long distance running. So I did that. I did a couple half marathons. And then it was finally that my dad, he wasn't concerned or anything, but he was just he saw how much I ran, and I ran a lot. Because it's kind of addicting when you're a long distance runner. You almost you get addicted to just running. It feels good. It feels so good afterwards. And he was like, Lexie, you cannot continue to just run all the time. And I was like, okay, whatever. But he was like, let's get you a gym membership. So he got me a gym membership to the gym that he went to, which was a Gold's Gym. And I joined there, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I was very, very shy. I was the girl that was afraid to, I was the girl that stepped into the gym, and I thought everybody was watching me, and I was super afraid to do anything wrong, right? So my dad got me a personal trainer. He's like, let's get you a couple sessions. That way you can learn to do things safely. So I got a personal trainer. I met with the personal trainer for about once every week for a few months. And honestly, it just picked up from there. Like the more I met with the trainer, the more confidence I got in my ability to like lift weights and to know what I was doing. And then I was like, oh, I really like this. And, I just did more research on my own. I found Paul Ravella, my current coach and boss, on YouTube at the time. And I watched a lot of his videos. I watched a lot of Lee Norton's videos. And I was just like so immersed in like weightlifting. And that's when I was kind of at that age where like, okay, I was starting to look at colleges and I had to kind of figure out like what it was that I wanted to major in. And all throughout high school, I had kind of thought I wanted to go more of the corporate like business route. I was really big into entrepreneurship and business classes. So that's what I was going to major in for a while. And then I kind of made like a executive last minute decision, and I was like, you know what, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to major in exercise physiology, because I felt like if I were to have majored in like business or entrepreneurship, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but I kind of felt like I felt like would have had to kind of hide my passion for fitness, because I felt like in high school that was a part of me that I hid a lot from people. I didn't really talk about it, and so I just didn't want to have to do that in my career. So I'm like, you know what, that's gonna be my major. I'm gonna make it work. I don't think I really knew like what I wanted to end up doing with it, but I got into college and moving to Florida, moving to Tampa and majoring in that was like the best decision I could have ever made for myself.
It's interesting you mentioned like in high school you hid that a lot because I feel like at least in my experience in high school, there isn't like a fitness, and maybe that is something that is maybe going to come along in the future because fitness is getting more popular, but there's not really a fitness community in high school as much as there's like a football or cheer or basketball or baseball, or even like you have weightlifting, but not so much just like fitness for the sake of fitness. There's not like that outlet directly related to, at least not in my experience or anything that I've ever heard anybody talk about. There's not that like strict fitness. If you just want to work out, go have like a learning experience, good time at the gym, and then, do that as like as a team or whatever you want to call it, as a group. And then you just kind of go home and there's not necessarily any rhyme or reason for like, oh, there's no competition. It's just learning and about fitness and having a good time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you're so right. I mean, I think in high school, my high school had like I want to say there was a weightlifting like 1 and 2 course. I didn't do it at the time because it was really just a ton of like the football players that were, enrolled in it. I wanted to do my own thing. And so I didn't take those classes, but you're so right. It's like you have the sports teams, but you really don't have I didn't even know about bodybuilding at the time. I really didn't. There was, I think, one of my friends that I had met through my gym in St. Louis. He was really the only person I had ever known that had competed, and other than that, I had like no idea what the competition world was about.
Yeah. And so you mentioned like, okay, you're really into gymnastics at first, and then you like really get into running, and then bodybuilding is another like extreme kind of sport in a way, is it your personality to kind of like dive all into something and it's something into like go into that extreme level?
I think that is part of my personality, yes. And it's something like I think bodybuilding is so amazing for me because it's taught me so much about myself and it's really made me self-aware. But yeah, I would say I'm very competitive by nature, and like growing up, especially, I mean, I can think back to when I was in even grade school. Like I always wanted to be the best with like all of my sports. And even at school, and we would have our physical fitness tests. Like I always like I would strive to be the best and out of my class. And so I've always had that competitive nature, and I've always been very hard on myself. But bodybuilding has really taught me a lot in a sense of like, yes, you have to be extreme, but I also feel like I've learned to have a little bit more of a balance too when I need to, because like there's a time to push and there's also a time to pull. And that's something, I've really had to learn specifically this last year, like that, it's not always about being so extreme and so crazy, like with the regimen. But yeah, I would say that is probably a little bit of like part of my personality. And I would say gymnastics is really what instilled so much discipline within me. Like being a competitive gymnast, once you get up there with like, your level, like the type of coaching style I was used to was coaches who would like sometimes yell at you until you cried. And that was just like their version of tough love. And, they were girls that would cry at practice. And like, I remember I would get so much anxiety before practice sometimes, just like, worrying about what they were going to make us do conditioning wise. And so, yeah, so gymnastics is really where I feel like I built that discipline. And honestly, I don't know if it weren't for my gymnastics background, I honestly don't know if I would have, if I would have ever gotten into bodybuilding.
Yeah, it seems like gymnastics really is such like a very intense kind of thing.
It is. But you know what the crazy thing is? I mean, granted, I was young when I did it, but like I always think back and I'm like, I wonder what I would have looked like if I would have known what like proper nutrition was, because they didn't teach us anything about that in gymnastics. Like our coaches didn't really even care what we ate, right? Like we would have our practices were usually like so long to the point where we would have like a break in between where we would get to go in the break room and like have a snack. And, everybody would have like goldfish or, just these snacky snacks, right? That are just full of carbs and, whatever. But like we weren't taught about nutrition. So I always wonder, I'm like, would I have like how would I have looked and how would my performance have changed if I would have actually known anything about nutrition?
Yeah. And because you have that gymnastics and also cheer background, did you ever think about doing the fitness division?
You know what? I've definitely I know a girl who has she has a gymnastics background. She's a competitor and she recently got into fitness, and I think it'd be fun. But I really like the competition, and I feel like especially at the amateur level there's just not a lot of like competition when it comes to fitness. Like it's not a huge division at the amateur level, right? So I don't know. I thought about it before, but I just don't know if I'd be interested in it because you know what? When you do not practice, you lose it. And I mean, I can still do my basic, like my splits and whatnot, but I cannot flip around like I used to at all.
Gotcha. No, I just, it's very interesting because most of the people that I've talked to do come from those backgrounds or dance. That's another big one. But, getting into like
Yes.
when you started to think about doing bodybuilding, was it this thing where it's like, okay, yeah, let's just do it. Let's jump into it. Or was there kind of like a time period where you're just thinking about it, thinking about how am I going to make it work? Or are you more of the type that's like, let's just do it. And we'll figure it out later.
Yeah, so I would say I have a tendency to overthink, but I remember, I think when I'm thinking back to when I hired my first coach and I decided that I wanted to compete, I don't remember ever like really pondering on it for too long. I think I just kind of I mean, I don't think I didn't make the decision overnight, but I remember calling my mom because, of course, not that I needed like my parents' permission or anything, but I had to call my mom and, I was telling her kind of about what I wanted to do and that I was going to hire this coach and that I was going to compete. And my mom, she was like really happy for me. She was like, oh, that's really awesome. I was showing her pictures of what bikini competitors looked like. And she's like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. So once I had kind of her like approval and support, I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And I'm actually glad that I didn't overthink it because if I would have overthought it, I probably wouldn't have just like done it because of my circumstances, being in a college dorm room and like not having a kitchen. And it was just like the circumstances were probably not ideal, but I learned so much from it. And now anytime I prep, I'm like, okay, I did it back when I lived in a dorm room and didn't have a kitchen. Like I can do it now when I live in my own apartment and when I have like all the ideal circumstances. So it kind of humbled me.
And going through that first prep, tell us a little bit about that experience and what you learned and maybe some things that were kind of like eye-opening for you.
Yeah, so I think the biggest question I always get is like, how did you do it in college? Did like because I work with a lot of clients who are like the college age, well, not a lot, like a handful. And sometimes, they're always concerned, like, is prepping going to get in the way of my cognitive ability, my ability to perform as a student? And I would say like that was not anything that I really experienced. I don't think I didn't really ever experience any issues with like my attention span or, I didn't really get like that prep brain that impacted my grades or anything. And then, I think the other thing that I always people are always curious about is like how did it work in college being around, a ton of other college kids who are whole, into the party scene, into drinking and all of that, and then prepping for a bodybuilding show. And honestly, I am not ashamed to admit that I feel like I was a little bit of an outcast in college, and like I just didn't care. Like I didn't care if people judged me. I didn't care if like I didn't going out, that was not my scene. But I would say it was just, I don't know, it was really eye-opening in a sense of looking back at that process now, realizing like I knew nothing. I knew nothing. And I knew at the time I didn't know everything, but I didn't think like, I thought like, oh, okay, I know a decent bit. But like I did not know. Like I remember thinking to myself, "Oh, I'll practice my posing just like every day, 3 weeks out, and I'll be fine." I was like, "Oh, posing is so easy, right? I'll watch some videos, I'll learn that way." And now, like knowing what I know now, I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" If I look back at my old posing, and I'm like, cringe, right? It's like it's so humbling. So and it was funny too because like I remember I had two other roommates in my little room, and so I knew I kind of learned like the times when they were in class and they weren't gonna be in our dorm room. So those are the times I would like put on my suit, put on my heels, and like practice my posing. Getting progress pictures was also a little interesting as well, because I honestly I had to just like I didn't want to just take them in the middle of the dorm room with my roommates like sleeping, so I had to get really creative with where I took those. And I remember I would usually use like there was this one bathroom on the first floor of my dorm. It was like a big, just like one person bathroom, and I would just go in there and like try to have a little setup. But that always makes me laugh when I look back at my old pictures. I'm like, oh my gosh, it was just yeah, it was an interesting time, but honestly, it made for the best memories, and it's super humbling to look back at.
And how did your other two roommates handle it? It sounds like you were trying certainly to be like thoughtful of what, their situation was compared to yours, but like what were their thoughts, or did they like have any feelings about it?
Yeah, so honestly, they were the best roommates. Probably the best roommates I could have ever like hoped for. We were all very different, and I think that worked in our favor because we didn't step on each other's toes. But we were all very accepting that like each of us had different interests. And they, neither of them were into going to the gym at all. Like they didn't really care what they ate. But they knew that that was my thing, and they asked about it every once in a while, and they were supportive. And there were a few times I remember they would go to like these little like dorm socials and bring me back like a drink or like food, and I would just politely take it and then kind of just dispose of it or hide it afterwards and just say thank you. But they were very supportive, and I was very thankful for that. But I also feel like I feel like I have a tendency if I'm around people and I'm in prep, I can kind of hide it well. Like I'm not going to make it known that like I'm super hungry and super tired, right? Because like that's a me issue. I don't need to be taking that out on anybody else around me. But honestly, I'm so thankful for them because it really did work out well. They were supportive, and although they weren't into like bodybuilding or the gym or anything, they didn't question what I was doing. They knew I liked it, and that's all they cared about.
Are you looking for a supplement company that can help take your fitness game to the next level? Look no further than All Sport Pharmaceuticals. Their cutting-edge supplements are scientifically formulated to give you the edge you need in the gym and in life. Whether you're looking to build muscle, increase endurance, or boost recovery time, All Sport Pharmaceuticals has you covered. And with a wide range of products designed for people of all levels, you're sure to find the perfect supplement for your needs. So why wait? Give your body the support it deserves with All Sport Pharmaceuticals. Visit their website today to learn more and start achieving your fitness goals. That's pretty cool. So moving into like your actual show experience, tell us a little bit about that, and like where, even pre-show, like were there a lot of emotions, anxiety, stress, nervousness, anything like that, and then actually getting on stage?
So my first show was the Orlando Europa. And I didn't have a car my freshman year of college. So I remember one of my teammates, she picked me up and drove me, like, 'cause she was competing at that show too. She picked me up and we drove to Orlando. And yeah, I was pretty nervous. I think I just didn't know what to expect. Like I was excited and I didn't really have any expectations going into it. So that kind of laid off some of the nerves, but what really did it was that was actually the first time I had really like quote unquote traveled by myself, like without my parents or anything. Like that's the first time I booked my own hotel and made all my arrangements. And I was so proud of myself until I got to the hotel. And it was in Orlando. There's I forget the name of the hotel, but it's like a chain. There are multiple locations, right? So I get there and I'm like, here's my name. I'm here to check in. And they're like, we don't have a reservation for you. And I'm like what? And so they're like, oh, you're at the other location. So I went to the wrong location for the hotel, which was great. And then the cherry on top was the fact that I had forgotten my ID. And, they don't let you check into the hotel unless you have your ID. I knew exactly where my ID was in my dorm room. So like I had to beg the hotel person. I'm like, can I call my roommate and just like FaceTime them and have them show you my ID? Like that was so stressful. And so I think that was the most stressful part of the weekend, was really just like traveling by myself for the first time. But sometimes you don't learn until you jump into things like that, right? And then the actual show experience, it was fun. I had no idea what to expect. So I think in a way that alleviated a little bit of nerves. Like sometimes when you just really don't know what to expect, I don't know. I was just there. I wanted to have fun. And yeah, it was an incredible experience. And that's actually where I ended up meeting my current coach and my current boss, Paul Ravella, for the first time.
Seeing the other athletes, like what did that do anything for you? Was it like, oh wow, look at these people in a good way or in a bad way? Or like what was that experience like?
Yeah, so I was, and I'm not afraid to admit, I was one of those athletes that leading up to the show, I used social media, I used Instagram, and I would like try to find the girls that I was going to be competing against, which I never recommend doing. I always tell my clients, like, don't do that. Like, you're just inducing stress on yourself that you don't need. So I did that. I remember getting a little bit in my head about that. And then being at the actual show, being backstage, I remember there was another team there that was like kind of well known at the time. And seeing some of his girls, I was like, ooh, I was a little intimidated. And so I feel like, yeah, I was a little intimidated seeing some competitors leading up to it, especially because I made that mistake of just stalking, my competition on social media.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I always think back to like the older era of bodybuilders to where you might hear like, oh, this person's going to be at the show. And you might, if they're a well-known competitor, it's like we've seen them at their last show. So we kind of have an idea what they may look like, but there's all this like mystique surrounding it. That's kind of like how it used to be, was this like unknown. It was kind of really up until the show, you had no idea. And I think that can impact a lot when it comes to not just like mentally, but also physically. Like if you have no idea what this other person looks like, not that you should, but I feel like it could potentially impact like your training and your diet and all that other stuff as well.
Yeah, yeah. And the biggest thing, like I always tell my competitors that I coach and that I remind myself of is, if you're stalking your competition on social media, or you're seeing, let's say, like, you find some other people who are going to be competing at your show, you don't always know what they look like in person, right? Because a lot of times as a competitor, we take pictures when we're like mid pump in the middle of our gym session, and that makes us look like, pictures, in my opinion, add a little bit of weight to the frame too. So I always remind my competitors and myself, like, you never know what somebody is going to look like in person, right? And plus, specifically like with the bikini division, you may see somebody with a great physique on like Instagram, or you see their pictures and you're like, oh my God, they look amazing. But like, you never know what their stage presence and their posing is going to look like, right? Like I see it all the time. It shows girls who show up and they have amazing packages, but like they just don't have the best posing, or they don't look confident on stage. And that can, unfortunately bring somebody down placing wise, just if their stage presence isn't there.
Right. And I think that's actually an interesting thing you bring up. What would you, especially for like clients now, what do you recommend to kind of, for first time show competitors, or second time or third time, whatever, just getting into it, what do you recommend to try to like help that presence, help that confidence out?
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, because I work with a lot of like first time competitors. So I deal with this a lot, and I try to start them, like, try to schedule posing sessions with them as early as we can. Like I even have girls that aren't even in prep, they haven't ever competed, but they're, they're going that route. They're going to eventually compete and they're practicing their posing already. Because honestly, I think the earlier the better. Because just for a lot of people, like walking in heels and specifically posing, it doesn't come natural. With the exception, I mean, I do have a few girls. I tend to notice like people with a dance background or sometimes the gymnastics background, they just have naturally a little bit more flow and grace and fluidity. But I just recommend practicing as early as you can. Hiring a posing coach too. I know a lot of girls try to get around that because it's another financial burden. But I mean, even just getting a couple, like 1 to 2 to 3 posing sessions with a posing coach can be so beneficial. Because a lot of times, like, too, you may feel like you look good in a certain pose when really, like, that's not what the judges want to see, right? So I highly recommend practicing as early as you can, getting a posing coach. And then when it comes to like bringing out your confidence and personality, I'll recommend my girls to like create an alter ego name for like the person that they can snap into when they're on stage. Because some girls are just really shy and like it's not their personality to be super like just, have a lot of personality in heels. So sometimes I'll tell them, let's create like an alter ego name and you snap into that person when you're on stage. I think practicing with music also really helps. Like when you're just practicing at home or in the gym, like put on your headphones, practice to like create a playlist and practice to that because practicing with music in the background usually is going to evoke a little bit more fluidity, a little bit more personality compared to like if you're just practicing in dead silence.
Right. I always think posing is such an interesting one because, it really does show that you can have like a certain body, whether
Mhm.
that's maybe a little bit lesser than the competition or maybe a little bit more than the other competition. And that posing has such like an influence on how you're showing it.
When I did my first show, I didn't understand the importance of posing. I thought it was going to be so easy. And I was like, oh, I can just learn from videos. I look back at my first, show pictures and like, I had great physique, but like, I didn't know how to pose. And so my physique didn't look as great as it could have just because I didn't quite know how to showcase it in the best way.
So after that first show you did, was there was it like, oh, this is great, I'm hooked, or was there a period of time where it was like, that was a fun experience and then maybe we'll get back to it?
Yeah, so I remember I was hooked after that. It's like, when I was a gymnast and then when I was a runner, like I would get these like, they say the runner's high, or when I was a gymnast, like after gymnastics meets, you get this like high afterwards. You just feel amazing. And so that's the exact same thing I experienced after my first show. I wanted to do it again. I wanted to do another show. Obviously at that time, so being a freshman in college, I ended up moving back home for the summer, because I didn't take summer classes and the campus was closed. So that was a little up in the air, like as far as like, how was I going to make that work? Like, how was I going to choose my show? Where was it going to make sense to choose my show? Because obviously I had to move back home to St. Louis. Like, was it going to make sense to do another show in Florida? What was that going to look like? So I remember jumping on the phone with my coach after my first show. And I think we had decided on the phone, like we were going to there was a show in Orlando again at the end of June. And we had decided on that one, which obviously, so that required me, I had moved back to St. Louis at that point when the semester was over. So I had to actually fly to Orlando to do that show. But I remember being hooked. I was like, I love this. Now, after my second show, though, that was a little bit of a different story. Just because my mom, was really concerned. Like she didn't understand the sport. Obviously, she was a mom. She saw her daughter get super thin. And she thought I had an eating disorder. Which like, I don't blame her. She didn't know anything about the sport. She saw me, get very lean. And so after my second show, when I was back home living with my parents in St. Louis, she basically made me go to the doctor like right after my second show, like that Monday after the show. And the doctor was super concerned because obviously I dropped a ton of weight. And I remember just like feeling so hopeless at the time because I was trying to explain, to my mom and to the doctor, like, I didn't have an eating disorder. I was like, if I did, I would ask for help. I don't. I was trying to explain the sport to them and, they just didn't get it. And so then they made me go and get like a test on my heart. I had to go to a dietitian. And so that experience alone like traumatized me. And I would say that summer I kind of fell into like a really, really close to like being depressed. I would say that's the closest I've been to ever being depressed. Just going through that experience and kind of feeling like, oh, well, I just found something I loved, but can't do it anymore. So after that, I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get back on stage, right? So my mom basically gave me an ultimatum and said, if you don't like, if you don't gain weight or your blood work doesn't look better by the time, the second or your sophomore semester rolls around, like you're not going to go back to Florida. So I was like so afraid of that all summer. And so thankfully, by the grace of God, things improved blood work wise. And, I ended up having to get like an EKG on my heart. Everything was fine. My mom was just so panicked. So I did end up coming back to school after that, since everything was okay. And then I was just kind of like, all right, I was kind of scared and traumatized by that whole experience. I was like, I'm not even gonna worry about competing right now. Like, I'm just gonna focus on school. Of course, I was still going to the gym. I was still, eating well. I just was like, I don't know if I'm ever gonna compete again because that was like the most traumatizing experience ever.
Yeah. It's interesting because of course it's fair to be concerned, right? But
Mhm.
I feel like it's almost this, especially, current day, there's I don't know what to call it. I don't know if it's a double standard. I don't know if that's the right word, but people get so emotional about people getting too thin, which, like I said, is fair if it's a true concern, but
Mhm.
not the same if people put on 10 pounds or put on 20 pounds or put on 50 pounds. It's like, why do we see one as being, you know, red alert and the other one not? Because they could equally be the same bad issues.
100%. Oh my gosh. Yes. I feel the exact same way. And it's like, same with food, nobody bats an eye if you're choosing to eat a burger and fries and a piece of cake. Like, nobody's ever going to bat an eye. But if you're choosing to eat the salad or, eat the fruit or whatever, like people are like, oh, you're eating that? Like, why can't you eat normal? Like, I always got that, from my family. They're like, oh, well, when can you eat normal again? Or like, when can you eat real food? And that just really bugged me. And that was like, that's why I was so happy when I was able to move back to Florida, like having my own space and not being in that like judgmental atmosphere. That was amazing. And like, fast forward to now, thankfully my mom, it's funny, she's actually one of my biggest supporters now, which is like, wow, that's, it's done a big turn since when I first started bodybuilding and she was like traumatized. But I think what's really done it is she sees that I've learned a lot since then, right? And she sees that like I am a coach now. I'm under a really good coach. And she knows and understands the sport a little bit more because I've sat down, I've explained it to her. She actually came to a show. And furthermore, I think she sees how happy it genuinely makes me. And so she's a lot more keen to supporting. Plus, I have somebody in my family, very, very near and dear to me, that actually does have a true eating disorder. And so my mom has seen the difference between like that and me. And she knows, okay, like you don't have an eating disorder. And so I think she kind of understands it a little bit more. And so she's a lot more supportive nowadays. And she also doesn't really question my food anymore. She just knows she knows that I eat the way I do because I enjoy it. She knows that like I'm not depriving myself. And I think that's maybe what she used to think. Like she used to think that my food choices were me depriving myself. But now she just knows like that's what I enjoy. And therefore she doesn't really question my choices anymore.
I think something that you said, saying real food, that is one of my pet peeves. That's like one of the, even if people don't like say it in a negative way, just the fact that they have like this idea that one is real food and one is this other whatever they consider it, is just like so weird to me.
It is. And I think about it, I'm like, okay, truthfully, if you really break it down, like what I'm eating, because I'm eating very whole, fresh foods, is more real than what most people are eating, that processed food, takeout, all that. Like my food is more real than yours. So I don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, I think that term it's interesting as well. I think it's very, yeah, that's weird.
once you you got a few shows under your belt, how much of it to you in bodybuilding, I guess in general, how much of it is like this competitive drive to like win and be the best and move on and all that kind of stuff versus like the journey and the process of it to you?
Yeah, so I think when I first started, it was a little bit more about like the competitive nature and just like, I really wanted to place well and like, and of course that's still what I want, right? But I really have a greater appreciation for the journey nowadays. I understand that, the building season is just as important as the prep. And so like I feel like now I've really grown to enjoy the journey a lot more than just stage day and getting on stage and getting a trophy or getting a medal. Like I really have learned to appreciate the journey, just because I've learned so much throughout the process. In 2022, I took the whole year off to build. And I learned so much about myself. I gained a decent amount of weight that I had to gain in order to like make the improvements I needed to make. But that was mentally that was hard. But I learned so much about myself throughout the process, and I always kept reminding myself, I'm like, all right, this is going to pay off long term. Like you're doing something now that's making you a little uncomfortable, but you're going to make your future self proud. So I think recently I love the process. I mean, of course, I'm competitive. I want to win, but I think the process ends up teaching you a lot more than the trophy does, you know?
Looking for a supplement company that's as serious about your fitness goals as you are? Allsport Pharmaceuticals is here to help. Their top-of-the-line supplements are designed to help you get the most out of every workout with ingredients that have been scientifically proven to enhance performance and recovery. Whether you're a seasoned athlete or just starting out on your fitness journey, Allsport Pharmaceuticals has the perfect supplements to help you achieve your goals. Plus, with their commitment to quality and safety, you can trust that you're getting a product that's both effective and reliable. So what are you waiting for? Take your fitness game to the next level with All Sport Pharmaceuticals. Visit the website today to learn more. Yeah. And having that full year off from competition, does it help you see that long-term vision more? Does it help you like do you train in a different way, or do you maybe like just see whatever aspect in like in a different light because it's like, oh, I don't have to worry about getting ready for this and then that and then the other thing?
Yeah, I think the first couple of months was the toughest. Like, going from, starting to see those changes in your body, starting to regain that weight, that was the hardest for me. And then I remember, I think it was like probably like 4 or 5 months in. So it took a bit of time. I was starting to just feel like, all right, like I'm exactly where I need to be. Because I remember that, when I was stage lean, I remember that feeling. I felt so small. I was like, I felt just so tiny. And I'm like, oh, I know I need to build muscle. And so throughout my improvement season, I kept reminding myself of that feeling. I'm like, you don't want to feel that again. You don't want to feel like, a skeleton again when you're stage lean. Like, so I kept reminding myself of that throughout my whole building season, knowing that like, I was doing what I was doing so that way I could look different the next time I'm on stage. Like, it's one thing to get on stage year after year and look the same. Like, that's fine if that's, if you just want to get on stage for fun. But that's, yeah, I want to get on stage for fun, but I also want to do good and I want to improve. And so my goal was to get back on stage and look different. Therefore, I knew that I needed to take some extensive time off to do that.
Right. I think that's so hard because we see time such like in a weird way. I feel like sometimes we see like a year is such a this long time and I can't wait for this to be process to be over. But also sometimes we see a year as like, oh, that's not enough time. It's not we're not going to do enough in that period. So being able to like really put your mindset in like one thing and in one way and stick to that a whole year.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and it's like I said, the first couple months for me of my year off was the hardest. But then it was like 4 or 5 months in, I was like, all right, like this is flying by. I need to make the most of this time. And one of my things I promised to myself during my building phase was that I was not going to have that grass is greener mentality. I didn't want to sit in my improvement phase and wish I was in prep. And, I wanted to just really focus on being present and appreciating, all the pros of the improvement season. Cause honestly, there are so many, you're not hungry all the time. Your strength is amazing. You feel like an athlete in the gym. And also I think it's a really good time. Like you can focus on a little bit more balance in your life, right? You can go on trips and enjoy yourself a little bit more. So I tried to just really have that appreciation of where I was at in the present moment rather than like focusing on, oh, I just want to be in prep.
Right. No, that grass is greener thing is definitely a tricky thing because, especially when you do start to actually make a little bit of progress, you think, okay, when are we switching it up? When are we doing something else? Because I've made this. Now I want to see kind of like what that looks like.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, and honestly, and we can talk a little bit about like my current prep too, because that's taught me a lot about myself as well. Because I intended, well, I did start prep at the beginning of December. And about a month or a month and a half in, something was like my body was not responding how I had that kind of intuition of like something was off. But not only that, my digestion was awful. Like to the point where I had tried so many different things, like so many different supplements, so many different like dietary restrictions. I had tried cutting out certain things, doing so much troubleshooting, and something just wasn't adding up. And I was so frustrated because it was almost like an outer body experience. Like I didn't feel like myself. And I know every prep is not going to be the same, but I just knew something was not right. So I seeked out some help from a naturopath, and come to find out, I had a really, really bad, just like essentially I had SIBO really, really bad in my gut. And so I kind of had like, after taking a year off and really hoping to just like hit the ground running and start prep, I had to essentially kind of pause prep and focus on just healing my gut, because my gut was also really wreaking havoc on my thyroid. So the two are really intertwined, and my thyroid was like completely off. My TSH was through the roof high. And a lot of that came down to the fact that like my gut was just so distressed. So I kind of had to like pause prep for a little while starting in January. And honestly, I've spent January and February really focusing on getting my gut under control and getting my thyroid back to a normal level, right? Because as an athlete, as hard as it can be, and as much as sometimes we want to push, I knew that I needed to take care of what was going on internally, before continuing to push. So that's been something that's really taught me a lot too, because it's like after taking this full year off and you're so excited to get back to it, and then to kind of be thrown that curveball of like, oh crap, like, I have to extend my prep out, or I have to kind of pause my prep even longer. Like that was a little hard, and that was very mentally challenging.
I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially within the world of fitness and bodybuilding, to where you really know, like even a day, like let's say you just miss one workout or like have one meal that's weird or whatever.
Mhm.
To me, that's like I can think about that for a week. I can think about that for, a month and be
Yeah.
like, oh, I wish I would have got that right. Or, I would be so much better off if I would have got that one thing right. In reality, that one thing is so minute. It's so minuscule. And then you stretch that over a week, and then you stretch it over, several weeks or months or whatever it is. And this, I can only imagine like the mental strain that would take because, like I said, I mean, even just missing like a workout, that can be challenging sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. And I was really like, I mean, through it all, I always told myself, like, everything happens for a reason. I always say everything happens like for me, not to me. And I was, but I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it was really, really tough, especially with the whole gut issue thing. Like, and everything I was eating was just like nothing was like settling well with me. It didn't matter if I was eating something super simple or something super complex. Like just I felt like crap. And I was grateful though with the person that I worked with. We did a bit of like what she called a gut detox. So it was really just some supplements that we implemented. We really worked on my stress management. And I didn't really have to do a ton as far as like I didn't have to really pull back in the gym. I didn't have to really change too much with like my diet, so to say. But my coach and I decided like through all of that, we were just gonna like keep my macros very like kind of moderate. Like we weren't going to continue to push, and we were just going to wait until like everything internally was back to a good spot until and then once everything was back in a good spot, we were like, all right, we'll push when everything internally is in a good spot.
So was it ever particularly like pinpointed this is the thing, or was it a multitude of different variables that caused that, or like, what was the final kind of say on that?
Yeah, so I asked my naturopath a lot about that. I was like, what caused this? Was it something I did? And honestly, she told me, she's like, this is really, really common amongst athletes. And I do feel like I almost feel like the gut issue is almost kind of like a fad nowadays in the bodybuilding industry. Everybody's claiming to have these gut issues, but with like my scenario, I knew something was off just because like I was feeling like my stomach just felt awful day after day after day. And she basically told me that it's very common with athletes, and honestly, you can get it from something as simple as like just using a public restroom. I don't say that to like scare anybody, but apparently it's pretty common, I think. But also from what I've learned as an athlete, when you put so much stress on your body, the gut naturally, I think it's like the gut lining is a little bit more susceptible to letting that bad bacteria through. So I think that that is truly what did it for me. I mean, being an athlete my entire life and always putting a good amount of stress on my body just through physical activity, I think that like probably was bound to happen to me at one point in time. But I would say, if anything, going through that process really it really made me so grateful to just feel normal again. Like this past week has been the best week I have felt in like I cannot tell you how long. And so I've had such a great amount of gratitude for just feeling normal again. And like now my body is responding. We haven't even changed anything, but like now just, now that my thyroid levels are back to normal, now that my gut issue is about 90% resolved, like my body is just responding now. And I feel more like Lexie. Like I feel more like myself. And it's honestly just like it makes me feel so good to just feel normal again.
Yeah, I kind of went through a little bit of some digestion issues or whatever it was a few years back, and there's nothing worse than like knowing that when you eat, your stomach's gonna hurt. Like it's just, I don't know, it's just something about that. And
Yeah.
I never really specifically pinpointed. I was on like this certain diet at the time just to like try it out, and then having myself kind of go back to normal a little bit. I mean, it was just so like a relief whenever like, oh, I can eat, and I'm not going to be like wanting to lay down 5 minutes after.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And like at the end of the night, my stomach would be like, so distended, and it was just it's uncomfortable. And like I said, for so long, I thought it was a me issue. Like I thought it was something I was eating, or just I thought it was something like I could control. But then come to find out, like I had eliminated so many different variables. I had troubleshooted so much that I was like, all right, I don't think this has anything to do with food. And thankfully I was validated in what we found out. And yeah, and it's great to feel normal again.
This podcast is sponsored by Smoking Gun Coffee, a veteran-owned coffee company that strives to give back to those in need. Don't forget to use code TWR10 for a 10% discount at checkout.
Yeah, it's really good to also kind of, because a lot of people go through certain circumstances and they don't ever figure something out. Maybe they go to a person who doesn't specifically know the right thing, and it's like, okay, well, I'm never going to know, and they just deal with those kind of things, and it's really sad, but really good, definitely, that you're kind of back on a good track. So getting into like where you are now, you're on prep, right?
I am, yeah. So I'm officially like, I guess, I mean, technically I was never really out of prep when I was going through like my gut protocol, but we are more like in a maintenance phase. So yeah, so I'm in prep. I'm about, let me think. So I'm about a little over 10 pounds down since like the beginning of December. So like as of a week and a half ago, my body has been responding really, really well. And I think that's truly just because like my gut is so much better now. And I got my thyroid labs back a few weeks ago and they're completely normal again. So that's good.
Yeah. And so what are your some of your goals for this year upcoming, 2023? It's still really early in the year. I think a lot of people have a lot of high hopes for what's to come within at least the sport of bodybuilding, and maybe even more than that for yourself. But what are some of your goals?
Yeah, so so right now with being back kind of like in prep and my body's responding, I would say I'm probably about 10 pounds away from my stage weight, maybe a little less. I'm not quite sure yet, but I haven't really like I have some shows that I would love to do, but I'm also okay with just like let's see how my body responds, and then as I get a little bit closer to being stage lean, we'll pick the shows from there. Because like living in Florida, there's so much to choose from, and I wouldn't mind like traveling if I needed to. But my goal honestly is I just want to compete as many times as I can. I definitely want to do a couple regional shows first, before going to the national shows or the national level. I'd like to just get behind, Tyler Mannion again, get behind Sandy Williamson again, because I have been behind them before. And I just, honestly, I want to see what I look like this time around, because, I've never taken a year off from stage with the intent of like building. And so I think, and I mean, I hope I built a decent amount of muscle, because that was my feedback last time was like, hey, you've got great shape and balance, but like you just need to add size everywhere. So my goal is I want to get back on stage. I want to prove to myself that like I have improved, and I want to compete as much as I can. In 2021, I competed 3 times. And so I would love to compete again at least 3 times this year. I want to do a few regional shows first, like I said, and then do like the national circuit. And thankfully, yes, I did start prep early in the year, so like even though I've had to push back my show date, there's still so much to choose from. And so as long as my body is responding well and I'm feeling good, I mean, I want to prep and compete as much as I can this year, and just have fun with it, and also showcase and share the journey on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, on Instagram. I know some competitors, they like to stay a little bit more quiet about their prep, and rightfully so. I can see why, but I like sharing the journey, because I just like being vulnerable, and I don't know, I just like taking people along for the journey. So I really just want to compete as much as I can. And I mean, ultimately, like my biggest goal would be a pro card. I think that's, a lot of competitors' goals. And I always tell myself I'm not a pro yet, but I try to act like one, because I truly believe you want to act like who you want to become, right? So although I'm not a pro yet, I want to act like one. So that way, when eventually it hopefully does happen, it's not like a weird transition.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've heard too, especially from people who, were at a very high level. It's like you can't wait until you're there to start being that person. You have to be that person from, a certain point to get there. There's no like, oh, I want to, hang out, chill out, do this, and then also be a bodybuilder. When I get pro, I'll start taking it more seriously. You have to, from what they've said, at least you have to be a pro regardless of your status.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. And I think, like you said, I mean, if you turn pro, I mean, not that I don't feel like this happens a lot, but just like if somebody turned pro out of sheer luck, I mean, you're eventually, if you didn't act like a pro before, you're probably going to be in for a reality check when you do turn pro and you go up against the other pro league girls. But yeah, and I just genuinely love this sport so much. It's taught me more than I could have ever imagined. Like it goes beyond just the physical transformation for me. I feel like I've learned more about myself mentally than anything. And honestly, one of the biggest things this sport has instilled in me is like confidence within myself. Growing up, I was very, very shy, very shy. Like throughout high school, very, very shy, very quiet, never spoke up. I would say I lacked some confidence within myself, and the weight room and bodybuilding has really given me a great outlet, and it's really just built more confidence within myself. And so I feel like I'm a lot more confident in my capabilities now, and I believe in myself a lot more than I did back in the day.
That's really cool. I think, like you said, bodybuilding is an interesting sport because it's a physical manifestation of really just what you're mentally capable of.
Yes, it's funny because like I always tell my clients, I feel like it's more of a mental, like, it's you need more mental grit than sometimes you do physical. Like I feel like a lot of times the roadblocks in bodybuilding happen because of our mental space. So it's almost like it's more of a mental sport than anything.
Yeah, for sure. So, because you're a coach and, having last year as kind of like a year where you didn't compete.
Mhm.
So being a coach, maybe it was a little bit more of like it's a different experience, from maybe what this year's going to be, where you are competing more, where you're in prep a little bit more. How have you thought about that, or like how are you maybe going to handle just like being able to be that coach that you want to be while being in a bit of a different mental space and physical space?
Yeah, so that was cool. Like last year, I have to say, I love being like behind the scenes and I love being a stage mom and like, coach behind the scenes. I love that just as much as competing. I really do. But I always, I always make a promise to myself that I'm never going to let my prep get in the way of my coaching or my quality of coaching. So, I've had girls in the past that are like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I feel bad, telling you this because I know you're in prep. I don't want to cause any stress on you. But I'm like, no, like, coaching for me, like that's my job. That comes before like prep. I mean, obviously coaching, it's my job. It pays the bills. Me competing doesn't. So I feel like I'll be able to manage both pretty well in a sense of I try not to stress too much about like, okay, when my show days actually occur, like, is that going to fall on a client's show day? And hey, if it does, we'll make it work. I try not to stress about it too much now because, one thing I've been prone to do in my past years is like I'll stress about things way far in advance, and it's just that stress that you don't need. So I'm trying to just kind of like take things as they come. But I've got some really great competitors this year hitting the stage, and I'm so happy for them and so excited. So if it ends up that like, I mean, who knows if I take some girls to nationals and it ends up like we're at the same show, obviously, they're going to come first. Like, even if I'm competing, they come first and I'll worry about myself second, but we'll kind of cross that bridge if it ends up coming to that.
Yeah, that would be a pretty good problem to have.
I know. I think it'd be kind of fun too. But yeah, I tell all my girls, I'm like, hey, like just because I'm in prep, like does not like you come to me with anything you need because coaching, like my coaching quality, if I ever start to notice like my coaching quality diminishing because of my own prep, that's when I would probably have to like sit back and ask myself, all right, like what do you need to change in order for your coaching quality to be up to standard? Just because I never want my own passion or my hobby to get in the way of like my quality of work.
So as far as like that goes, do you kind of envision yourself more as like true like a coach first who also body builds, and that's like the direction that you would prefer to take it, or do you see it more as kind of seeing where it goes and playing it from there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, kind of just seeing it how it goes, right? Like, you know what? If I ended up getting my pro card and then like, doing the pro circuit, like I know that that is a bit of a job. Like, obviously it's not like it pays, being a pro bodybuilder, it's not like you get a salary or anything, but this kind of a job in a sense. So kind of just seeing where it goes. I never want to give up coaching though. So I think if it came to that point where I was competing a lot and like I was at the pro league and I was, doing a lot of pro shows and being strategic about it, probably what I would just have to end up doing is like lighten my client load a little bit, because coaching is like my passion. I can't see my life without it. So I think if it came to that, I would just have to like lighten my client load a little bit.
Right. Yeah. Well, it definitely sounds like there's a bright future ahead, and for this season, for the future, with it within competing and coaching. So best of luck to you with that, with all that stuff that's going on, and the upcoming bodybuilding season.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited. I just went to Clash Orlando yesterday. So like first big, I would say, I mean, besides the Arnold, like one of the first big, pro AM shows here in the area. And I'm so happy I went because every time I go to a show, I am just so excited for like, it just kind of lit this like spark in me, to keep going in this prep. So I'm pumped for what's to come. It makes me want to go just like to the gym and like crush it, or put on my posing heels and practice my posing all afternoon. Like it just, yeah, it kind of reignites that fire. And honestly, I tell my clients, I'm like, hey, if you're struggling in the midst of prep, or you're just having one of those weeks where you just feel miserable, like try to go to a show, go to a seminar. Like a lot of times just going to those things can kind of reignite that spark and that passion, and it reminds you like why you do this too.
I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. It was great getting to chat with you tonight.
No, this was awesome. It's such an honor to be on here. So thank you for having me.
Certainly. And if you want to share any social media or any YouTube or website or anything like that, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so my main form of social media is going to be my Instagram. It's just Lexie Mate, so LEXIEMAIT. And then I also have a YouTube channel, so you can it's linked on my Instagram under my link tree. But if you just search my name, Lexie Maitland, you'll find it. I try to put out a video every week. Lots of vlogs. I'm going to be sharing my whole prep on there as well. And then if you are like interested in coaching, I do have my coaching link or inquiry form is linked in my Instagram as well. So you can always reach out to me on Instagram, shoot me a DM if you have any questions about anything.
If you're tired of searching for a coach or trainer, somebody who knows what they're talking about and has experience, make sure you go check out the new Coach's Corner on weightroompodcast.com. You can find quality, qualified coaches to help you achieve your goals, whether that's in bodybuilding or just general fitness. Stop wasting time and start achieving your goals today. The link to the Coach's Corner is down in the description below.